Welcome to the Inner Work Community Podcast, which aims to provide you with language, tools, and guidance in your journey towards personal and relational wholeness. We'll discuss topics ranging from psychology, spirituality, tantra, leadership, sexuality, polyamory, and more. My name is Michael, and I'll be your host for insightful interviews with thought leaders, practitioners, and experts who have a thing or two to share about living an integrated and meaning-making life. Whether you're looking to deepen your connection with your interior world, overcome challenges in your relationships, or expand your psychosomatic horizons with fresh perspectives and paradigms, the Inner Work Community Podcast offers a safe yet challenging space for dialogue and introspection. This is all a gift, so let's go enjoy it together. I have the absolute pleasure today to host Jason E. Smith in a conversation around the symbolic life. Jason is a Jungian analyst with decades of experience in the field of depth psychology. He holds a master's degree in counseling psychology with an emphasis in depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, where he trained extensively in the work of Carl Jung. Jason is also a graduate of the C.G. Jung Institute in Boston, where he completed his certification as a Jungian analyst. In his work, Jason integrates Jungian psychology with various spiritual traditions to help individuals encounter their hidden lives and find greater wholeness. He is the author of Religious But Not Religious: Living a Symbolic Life, a book which explores the role of symbols in living a more attuned and connected relationship with self. Jason is also the creator and host of the Digital Jung Podcast, which offers a grounding, liturgical, if not contemplative approach to Jung and the healing journey through story, myth, and fairy tale. In addition to his writing, podcasting, and clinical practice, Jason is a speaker and facilitator, helping individuals cultivate a symbolic life in an increasingly rational, fast-paced, and technological age. Jason, thank you for gifting us with your time, with your presence. And as we get started, I think I want to just go to that 30,000 foot view question, right? What is the symbolic life? Maybe unpack this term symbol from a Jungian perspective. Yeah, symbol, and what is the symbolic life?
Sure. Yeah, I think you have to start with the idea of the symbol, right? The definition of the symbol as Jung talks about it. And Jung's kind of standard definition is that the symbol is the best possible expression of that which cannot be expressed in any other way, right? It's the best possible expression of that which can't be expressed except by way of an image. And so the symbol is pointing to something that is transcendent of our consciousness, ultimately something that we don't yet know. We can't yet circumscribe by our thinking and our logical understanding. So the symbol in some way is transparent to transcendence, right? It points beyond itself, and it's a function of relationship to that other, to what's beyond. It allows us to have some relationship to it, right? And even though the symbol is not the same as what it points to, it's intimately connected. So you can't do without the image. The image really is the bridge, and it represents some. Jung talks about it as a gestalt, right? Some whole that we get sort of all at once through the symbol. The symbolic life then has to do with some relationship to that unknown, transcendent dimension, right? It is an experience, or it is a life that focuses on meaning, and it's an affirmation of meaning. It's an affirmation that life is meaningful, right? That there is some whole and some coherence to life, that it's not arbitrary and random. And it's a way of living in relationship to that, right? So the religious life, it's interesting, this phrase, the symbolic life. Jung, as far as I know, only uses it in one essay called The Symbolic Life, and it's a talk that he gave to a group of clergy in 1939. It's a talk called The Symbolic Life. It was the title given to one of the volumes of his collected works, but he never uses the phrase anywhere else that I've been able to find. Other people have picked it up, particularly the Jungian analyst Edward Edinger. But Jung usually talks about religion, the religious outlook, the religious life. But here he's using the symbolic life. And my fantasy about that is that because he's talking to clergy, he is trying to loosen up the religious dimension and not get locked into conventional ways of understanding what the religious life is. But it is essentially that. It can be expressed in one's creative life. It can be expressed in one's psychological development. But it is that relationship to the meaningful dimension of experience.
I don't know if it's in your book, but I'm coming back to someone defining religious or religion, and kind of the etymology of that word being about bringing together or somehow like pulling together. Can you, like, your book is religious but not religious, so can you unpack the religious attitude or the religious function
Yeah.
as you talked about it? Yeah, maybe just say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So the heart of that idea, and sometimes I think of the symbolic life as that quality of religious but not religious, which is, frankly, it's kind of deliberately ambiguous. But the heart of it is a distinction that Jung makes between religion and creed. And so for Jung, religion is not the thing religion, right? It's not the particular creed or belief system or doctrine. It's an attitude, right? So what we would normally think of as spirituality or the spiritual, that's what Jung refers to as religion, and he differentiates it from creed. Creed is that which is believed, the belief to which we assent, the group to which we belong, the particular denomination. But the religious attitude is the individual attitude. And the definition of religion for Jung kind of hinges on the Latin root, right? Religio or religio. And one way to look at that definition is that religio is that which binds, like ligament, right? It connects us. It connects us to the for human dimension. And he uses it in that way sometimes, but most of the time he uses religio in a different way. And the way he describes it there is a careful attention and observation of the numinous, or a careful attention and observation of the irrational facts of experience. And they're very similar in some ways, but the difference in the second one is, well, in the first one, it's about the connection. It's the connection to the archetypal depth. In the second one, it's about the work and attitude that the individual has and the way they pay attention to those depths. So it's the attitude. It's not just the connection. It's the state of consciousness that one brings. And that makes all the difference, I think, for Jung, right? Because it is not what is believed, but a way of encountering something.
Yeah, the what is believed. I mean, I think this expands in my mind and in the work I do beyond even just religious belief or creed. It gets into just like the hidden beliefs that we have about how the world works. I'm not a good public speaker. That's a belief that one may have about themselves. And it's a limiting belief, right? It may be somewhat accurate, because if you believe you're not a good speaker and you don't practice that, then yeah, you would get up and probably not do well. But
Right.
I think that there's the religious piece, but when it comes to just the individuation process, the process towards wholeness, like there's a role for beliefs, there's a role developmentally and at different stages for believing certain things to be true and like self-evident and concrete. And yet when things are too concrete, it can be very limiting, right? And so I have an article or a column that I write for, and it's called Transgressive Spirituality. And in this idea that we have to transgress, I think this is a quote from Jung, in order to grow, we must transgress. Can you talk a little bit about, I don't know, the relationship between symbol, the image that communicates something beyond it, and how it will invite us to transgress or to cross over the lines of our beliefs, whether they're religious or just personal or cultural beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I guess what I want to say about the idea of transgression or transgressing belief, and I actually think belief is very important, by the way. Jung has a distinction that he makes, and he says, I don't believe I know, right? And if I don't know it, then belief doesn't help me to that. And I think there's some validity to that. That's a bit of his scientific mind in action. But there is a dimension of belief which is not just assent to a certain idea, but it is a commitment or a giving of oneself, an opening without, this gets closer to that element of faith where one opens, whether one knows or not, one opens to it. But I guess the place where transgression might come in is in the awareness that our knowing is always incomplete. And so where someone like Meister Eckhart might say, you must leave God in order to find God, that's a transgressive move, right? You've got to let go of God to experience God. Or Abraham Joshua Heschel talks about how the Torah that is given and written down in the Bible is not the complete Torah. It is the part that has been received, and it is a kind of intimation of the whole Torah, but there is something beyond just those written words. And the only way to that aspect of the Torah is through some kind of sensing of it, right? Some kind of sensitivity toward it. So it goes out of something that is literal and concrete, and you must adhere to this. There's always a more. There's always something beyond. We cannot set a limit to it, because then God is only an object in our own minds, and we are superior to the divine, right? The moment we set the limit. And it's like trying to draw a line around an infinite and expanding universe. As soon as you do that, there's something on the other side.
Wow. I feel like we could just keep going up and up and up and get more meta and existential. But I find so much, and I imagine those listening find resonance with this in just practical everyday life. If we were to bring it down to the ground a little bit, this symbolic life, can you root it in how do we encounter? Like, what are the main ways that we encounter the symbolic life? How can we practice building that relationship with the symbolic life?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important question. So one of the things that Jung writes about is the necessity of having a symbolic attitude. So again, it all depends, or so much depends on our state of consciousness. how we approach. And so the symbolic attitude is a way of uh, attending to everything, to life from that standpoint of meaning, to attend to things as meaningful. Jung talks about it's the state of consciousness that assigns meaning to events. He says assigns meaning to events, regardless of whether that meaning lines up with the bare fact of the event, right? The meaning kind of surpasses the bare fact. I kind of prefer the idea of discovering meaning in events as opposed to assigning meaning, because that feels very conscious and deliberate. And for me, it really has to do with a certain kind of responsiveness and openness, right? It's not an arbitrary choice. Well, what am I going to make of this? There's an element of that, but it is a suspension, so to speak, of disbelief and a kind of holding open of a way of receiving, being personally touched by. And this is one of the core demands of the symbolic life, is that you can't think it. You can't stand back from it and just think about it intellectually. You have to participate in it. It has to be a real concern for you, right? The questions have to matter. Why are we here? Is life worth living? What is the meaning of my particular existence, my life? What does it mean to be a human being? These questions are not abstract. We have a personal stake in them because they affect how we live our lives. And if you approach it from that, and in that sense, it's very much a kind of philosophical way in, from that old idea of philosophy, the love of wisdom, right? Not some kind of rational, abstract thinking about life, but how do we live our lives? What is a good life? Where does wisdom dwell? Wisdom, by the way, is out in the street calling to us. It's everywhere. And she offers herself if we will just come and meet her, right? And so there's part of the answer, is we go out to meet her, and we look beyond the surface. What else is happening here? Right? We try to sort of dissolve the surfaces of things to see the inner situation at work in things.
I'm having this sense that symbols and somehow just kind of land for me. I'll just say they land in my body. It's like suddenly there is this relationship with something very seemingly mundane that is bringing me into a whole different dimension. For example, I cut my finger 3 minutes before hopping on the podcast. And I had the only Band-Aid I had was one of my kids' Band-Aids. We need to go shopping for Band-Aids. And I put that on, and it was just this moment of like kind of welcoming the childlike, welcoming the hidden, the non-polished. And it was such a gift, because I was like, oh yeah, we can just engage in this conversation and just enjoy this. I feel like there can be like, one of the things for me that can be overwhelming is when I engage the symbolic life, unfortunately, or fortunately, the symbolic life engages me back. And then I can feel like wildly overwhelmed with meaning. There's so much meaning. How do we live our life in the symbolic while also navigating the world of, taxes and schedules and all of that? Like, what's the real life way that we do that?
Well, that's a great question. By the way, I love the story about the Band-Aid, because the child's Band-Aid in the play, I think, is also right, but it also, that awareness comes through a little wound. So some other way kind of gets wounded, and now brings you into a different state. That's all part of it. Yeah. how do we balance this, or how do we find the right relationship to it? Patricia Berry, a Jungian analyst, I think it was Patricia Berry, talks about she says, we need to be unpsychological most of the time in order to be psychological some of the time. That there needs to be something to compare it against. Meaning loses meaning if everything is meaningful and nothing feels like a struggle or a challenge. There isn't a question that stirs us, there isn't an answer that we can search for. And so consciousness itself does these things, and life does these things. But I think one of the pieces here is that a lot of spirituality aims for the heights and for the light and for that which is above and beyond, and that whole realm, beautiful realm of meaning, doesn't know how to deal with the body. And the body has its demands, and it has its bodily functions, which are not particularly beautiful. And the embodied experience of being human is pretty mundane. And if we can't also recognize that sometimes the garbage needs to be taken out, we will get overwhelmed by garbage, right? Because we're out looking at a beautiful sunset, but we're not making sure we're taking care of the basic at home. And so I think it's really important not to let it get so spiritual that we lose the earth under our feet. And this is one of the critiques that Jung brings to the Christian tradition, is as it developed, the symbol of Christ became this all light symbol, and the part of us that was embodied and sexual and had bodily functions was left out of account in that and disparaged. And when that happens, it takes its revenge in one form or another. And by the way, Jesus didn't shy from talking about bodily functions. He talks about food goes in the mouth and it's eliminated. He was talking about defecation. He didn't avoid those things, but it's the tradition, and Jung makes this distinction. This isn't based on anything necessarily that Jesus himself said. It was what was made of what he said that lifted us up off the earth too far.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it brings me to this. You pulled a quote forward from Jung in the early part of Religious but Not Religious. And you mentioned that the symbol is alive. Well, this is a quote from Jung. The symbol is alive only so long as it is pregnant with meaning. In this fullness, he's using that metaphor of pregnancy, right? There's this gestation that it's alive, it's living, it's evolving.
Yeah.
Symbolism in and of itself perhaps evolving. What happens, like a lot of the symbols, like whether it's Christianity or a different faith tradition, they are no longer pregnant with meaning, but then they're held on to, white knuckled, and to let go of them can be very socially costly. Yeah, okay, what do we need to do when symbols are no longer vibrant, evolving, or pregnant with meaning? And then can symbols be re-energized or reinvigorated? Is that even possible? Like, yeah, can you say more about that?
I am of the opinion and belief that the symbols can be reinvigorated, that we can have a living relationship to them. There is some discussion, and I believe Jung talks about this, that symbols have their lifespan, and over time they are drained of their aliveness, and then there is a need for a new symbol. And that may be true. I don't know that I have much to say to that. That feels like um, you know Jung had this idea um, somewhere, I think in one of his letters, where he talks about the new religion that is coming will emerge in like 600 years. And I mean, in the meantime, we're here and we have to kind of find our way. But it's just that locking down of the symbol. It's just that locking down of the doctrine around the experience. So there's an experience. And again, the symbol points to that which cannot be known. And as soon as we know what that is, as soon as we know what we've locked down what the meaning of the crucifixion is, it doesn't captivate in the same way. We have to work hard to like follow a particular idea. And it doesn't just hold us in the same way. I mentioned Heschel before. Abraham Joshua Heschel talks about wonder, and that as opposed to a will to believe, we need a will to wonder. And it's wonder and that place where, again, that sort of transgressive kind of breaking through to what can't be known, what is ineffable, what is unnameable. That's where we attach meaning, or we discover meaning, as opposed to attaching or deciding on meanings of something that drains them of meaning. And it always has to come through a kind of poetic image that is suggestive as opposed to declarative. This is that. And I think it's, if we are able to work our way back to that place of wonder, of, meeting wisdom in the street or meeting Jesus outside the church and kind of maybe hearing what he might have to say about the church that has come up in his name, right? But you can't necessarily choose that. Again, there's an element of discovering what speaks to you, what grips you. In that place is where you will find the symbol that is living for you. So yes, you can, but you can also get to a place where you may have been injured too much by your religious tradition. The life may have been taken out of it, and it may be too hard to work your way back. And you need another way to hear the divine utterance, right? For me, reading various scriptures, reading myth and poetry, and becoming familiar with the language of image and symbol makes it possible to hear that divine utterance, because all of a sudden you have a broader kind of symbolic vocabulary, and it will come in ways that you might not expect.
I'm thinking about symbols of the archetypal self, right? Or how we relate to the self, the divine transcendence. And I'm mapping out my life thinking, when I first became, a Christian, the Christian mythology and Christ were these images of light that I desperately needed in a time of immense darkness in my own childhood, right? And adolescence. And then leaving that, I remember there was a season where deer, when we moved to Oregon about 10 years ago, deer became the symbol of the divine for me. Every time I was in this kind of moment of transition or like existential crisis, or my father-in-law was dying, a deer would suddenly appear somewhere, some wild encounter with this deer. And then, that symbol has lost a lot of potency over time too. And I'm currently exploring tarot, which my friend Sula here has introduced me to. And so there's this new engagement with some kind of symbol that is communicating something behind. And I think it really comes back to this idea of experience, right? What is your experience? I think Jung says in Psychology of Religion A creed being the result of many years and, of basically human experience being taken out, and
Right.
what you're left with are just beliefs that are detached from experience. Would you say that experience, whether that's experience in our waking life or experiences in our dreams, is there a sense that ultimately, even if we're connected with a religious institution or tradition, creed, would you say that ultimately it has to come back to experience? What should be our North Star there, if you will?
Yeah, I would say absolutely and without question. Definitively, I would say yes. And part of the reason I say it like that is you talked about the self, Jung's idea of the archetypal self. And the way that Jung describes the self is as the God image in the psyche. The self is the God image that we meet, and it takes a different form for each person. But here's the thing. When Jung talks about an image, he means something very specific, right? It is not a picture, right? We're not talking about an image of Jesus or an image of the Buddha or of, anything else like that, a mandala. An image is an experience, right? An image is an experience. It touches us at the level of our thinking. It touches us at the level of our feeling. It touches us at a sensate level. It touches us the level of intuition. We might have a picture of it, but mostly we have a response. And if the emotional dimension and responsive dimension is not there, it's not an image. Jung calls it a word picture, not an image. An image stirs us. And so when Jung talks about God image, he's really talking about the God experience. The self is the God experience. It is that sense that there is a transcendent reality that is in some way concerned with our personal experience. The archetypal and the personal are entwined in some way, right? One of the major symbol for me recently, coming out of a time of my own dryness and my own kind of feeling burnt out and not sure how to move forward or if I really cared to keep doing what I was doing, I spent a year captivated by music, playing music, learning more intensely the piano, listening to jazz. And I had no idea why. I had no understanding why. It didn't make any sense. And previously my experience of being engaged with Christianity and the Christian tradition didn't make any sense for me either. There were 100 reasons not to, and I had a lot of intellectual objections, and yet that's where my heart led me, and I didn't understand why. And here I was involved with music, and I wasn't going to become a professional musician. I don't know why I spent hours in a day at the piano. It didn't make any sense. But what came out of that's a symbol, right? It's not a picture. It's a captivating experience. That is a symbol because it has meaning. And what came out of that is not only the engagement with music, but a kind of revitalization of all the other things that had lost their aliveness. So those other things which had become dry and the meaning maybe had been drained out were revivified, right? The water flowed back in and the dry ground became fertile again. And I could pick up, got my work. I could pick up my own prayer and meditation life again. All of that returned. The symbol enlivens us, and it doesn't come in forms that we can anticipate. And if we trust it, I don't know why this is compelling, but it is. All I want to do is learn how to paint. All I want to do is spend time in nature. All I want to do is spend time with my nephew or my niece. Like whatever those things are symbols and they're real and they will teach you something beyond words.
Hi, Michael here. Hey, seriously, thank you for listening and engaging the Inner Work Community podcast. I trust today's episode gave you something to reflect on or illuminated a new trailhead to your hidden life. If this episode resonated with you, you can subscribe, share it with your people, and leave a review. That really helps spread the word and boost our online presence in this digital world. Remember, growth is not a straight line, and we're all figuring it out as we go. I'm grateful to be in this unfolding and excavating work with you. So until next time, be yourself. You've got a good self. And remember, it's all a gift.